Ow. All right, time for another Bull in the Basement. In this episode, dedicated to a guy, I guess I can call him kind of, you can leave your glasses on if you want.
Oh, either way.
Whatever's comfortable. It's a good look either way.
I can see all the cool stuff behind you better that way.
is a great friend of mine, and arguably a mentor of mine, Paul Peck. And for those of you that are watching this on social media or listening to it, wherever you might be that aren't from Buffalo, you might not know Paul's name. But if you do know anything about University at Buffalo sports, anything about Syracuse University sports, anything about Buffalo Bills sports, you will know Paul Peck's name because he's been heavily involved in all of them. And listen, even if you're in the bowling game in Western New York, you might know a little bit about Paul Peck. But Paul,
it all just means I've been around a long time. Rich.
It's okay though. But your resume is so impressive. You've done so many great things throughout your career. And you know, the thing with Bull in the Basement is basically we're going to talk to you about a lot of things probably most people haven't ever asked you about. And that will start with going back to Paul Peck, little boy, young man, teenager, high school, all of that. So you have covered sports and been a part of sports your entire life, right? So I'm curious, were you the guy that was like me, recording into a cassette player, play-by-play of fill in the blank game, whether you're watching it on TV or you're live someplace watching it? Were you that kid growing up knowing what you wanted to do your entire life? Because that was me.
Yeah. And I'll take you one step better than that. Like, yes, to answer all those, but I can always remember, I can remember just being interested in sports at a really young age, watching it, reading the sports page, like trying to learn as much as I could about it. And then sort of eventually gravitating towards all the great broadcasters that I grew up around. I grew up on the New Jersey shore. So a lot of it was New York City based. So, so some of the best broadcasters, ever were around there. So, for me, it was listening to the Mets games on the radio, on a summer night. It was shooting baskets in the backyard and doing your own play-by-play of yourself shooting baskets. I do have recollections of that, but just being around all that and being, enamored with the ability and the skills of those guys and ladies, not so much back then, but now. And ultimately deciding that I love sports much and knew that I was never going to make a living playing it. That was pretty obvious early on. So then you say to yourself, well, how can you stay involved in all this? Well, can I become a broadcaster? And I was pretty locked in on doing that. Probably by junior high school is when I knew that's what I really wanted to do.
So, okay. Did you play sports in school growing up?
A little bit, I was more of sort of a sandlot kind of guy with my buddies. I didn't, not that I'm the big hulking human being that I am now, but I really didn't grow until like my junior year of high school. So I was kind of shrimpy and wimpy back then. So like there wasn't going to be any football. I played a little bit of soccer and played a lot of basketball. But like I said, I was never particularly good at it. I wasn't really big. So, it was more on the periphery of being involved and like I was in the marching band my first 2 years of high school and then kind of realized that like, I want to be at the games, but not, I want to do something else at halftime, talk about the games, not marching on the field. So that was like a trigger point for me making that shift. And then I had some opportunities even in high school to do a little bit of work at a local radio station on the Jersey Shore. And that really was when I got a chance to do it myself and say, hey, you know what, I might be pretty good at that. This is what I really want to do. And then that was all locked in on finding a college to go do it at.
I can just see you, on the playground or in the backyard with a little like crossover step back J from Beyond the Arc.
Yeah. Euro step falling all over myself. That would have been more likely.
So were you, who were you fans of growing up?
Huge Mets fan as a kid. See, now you got to remember, I grew up in New Jersey in the Jersey Shore. And for the early part of my life, there were no teams in New Jersey. It was all New York. It was all Philly. And then when the Meadowlands gets built in 1976, you get the Giants to move there. And I was a huge Giants fan. And there was that connection. Like my dad was a Jets fan, but I wanted to be my own fan. And now we had our own team, even though they were the New York Giants. They played an hour from where I grew up. So, so I was always an Islanders fan because I kind of got caught up in that 1980 Stanley Cup run. All my buddies were Yankees fans, and we just argued incessantly at the lunch table, and I got so sick of the annoying, egotistical Yankee fans in the late 70s with Reggie Jackson that I sort of gravitated to the Royals. And George Brett was always my favorite player. So I was kind of the counterbalance to be a Royals fan, but always kind of lived and died with the Mets. The Nets had moved to New Jersey in the mid 70s before the Meadowlands Arena had even been built, when they moved from Long Island. So those were sort of my teams, because there was a little bit of a local connection to it all.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. Yeah, I hated the Yankees too, and that's why I became a Dodgers fan when I was a kid.
There you
So
go.
those great 70 was it 76, 77, whatever those 2 years the Yankees played
Davey
the Dodgers.
Lopes, Ron Say,
Oh,
Steve Garvey,
yeah.
Bill Russell, right?
You got them all.
Yeager,
Dusty
Sutton,
Baker, Reggie
those guys were
Smith,
awesome.
Bert
Yep.
Happy Hooten. Yeah, man.
Happy Hooten, right?
Yeah, Lasorda, obviously. So I became a Dodger fan. I've been a lifelong Dodger fan, but as I've grown older, I've just become kind of a baseball fan anyway. So okay, you know you're going to be now at this point. And were you like that stat guy? Like my nickname when I was a kid, kind of embarrassingly, and probably why I never had a girlfriend until I met my wife when I was 40, was Football Digest. So I literally could tell you name a guy I knew his jersey, or I knew what college he went to. It didn't matter who he was. I knew him. It was kind of bad, actually. Like I was that kid that didn't leave the basement because all I did was study sports and play Stratomatic. I don't know if you played Stratomatic growing up.
Thank you. I was just going there because I was going to tell you my Stratomatic story. Is my buddies got me involved in it, and I got hooked on it, and I played the entire 1980 season of like 25 games for every team and kept all the stats and I'll never to this day never forget that Champ Summers was my home run, hit the most home runs in that 25 game season for the Detroit Tigers.
Yep.
But yeah, so you and I were the same. Like we lived, Stratomatic was like huge. That was like in summertime when we were off on school, we'd go play stickball over at the school, and then we'd go back and play Stratomatic. Yep. Like, and that was our summer days. Like, totally into all that stuff, completely into it.
Really pathetic. I mean, I sat at my desk on a 75, 80 degree, beautiful summer day. I should have been outside doing something athletic. I'm sitting at my little tiny desk doing the exact same thing, rolling the dice, playing Stratomatic baseball.
Absolutely.
And to your point, keeping all the stats, game after game after game, doing a whole season. For some reason, I acquired the 1971 season. I don't know how I got that, but that was pretty fun to play with. And then, so I recently bought a brand new game. I'm
thinking about it too. It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about, like, you know what, when I get really bored, when I retired, I don't have anything to do. I said somewhere along the line, I'm going to get a Stratomatic game again. Do you remember how the coolest moment of our lives back then was when the Stratomatic cards arrived? Like that 2 weeks from when your mom sent the check in, and like you were waiting for them to come, and like when they arrived in that package, it was like the best day ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were probably like me too. It was that day. It was the day that you waited at the mailbox for your Sporting News, Sport Magazine, or Sports Illustrated to show up.
Both.
It was going to the store and buying some baseball or football cards, all of that. As a kid, yeah, man, boy, we have way more in common than I thought, which is cool. In our sort of sports geekery, but it's all good.
Absolutely,
it's all good. So yeah, I went to Clayton's over on Main Street in Buffalo. It's a little toy shop, and it was totally random. And I saw a new Stratomatic game. This is like 5 years ago. On like the bottom shelf, just kind of sitting there. It was all lonely. It needed someone to save its toy life, and I was like, man, I got to give this thing a home.
Good for you.
I did, and I've opened it up, but I, believe it or not, I've never actually played it. Because the cards are they're all perforated, but they're in sheets. So you have to basically tear them apart and create each team and put the rubber bands around them, or however you kept them. I don't know how you kept them. So I've been too lazy to unperforate them apparently. But the year I got was like Barry Bonds' last year or something. So I don't know, kind of cool.
Love it. Now they have like an electronic version of it now.
I know
you got to go back to the cards and the dice.
Not the same. Absolutely right. And the board and the whole deal. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So Paul Peck's on. We're moving on from our geekery. We're graduating you to college. So
Correct.
When I grew up in Rochester in the 70s and early 80s, the only college team really to root for was Syracuse. I mean, that was it. I mean, UB was nothing. in terms of athletics. And I didn't live in Buffalo. I lived in Rochester. So
UB didn't even have football for early parts of the 70s.
there you go.
After they had dropped it.
Right. And we'll get to UB because, of course, that's one of the big things you do now. So Syracuse, I mean, I still think I have a hand-drawn picture of Roosevelt Bowie. To give you an idea of how big of a Syracuse fan I was. I mean, I loved Syracuse. You ended up going
Louis
there.
without Louis? You didn't have the Louis?
Nah, there was no Louis. I wasn't that good of a drawer. I can barely do a stick figure. So one guy was enough. And of course, Roosevelt Bowie was a guy from right outside Rochester in Kendall, New York.
That's right.
So this is late 70s when like Duke was starting to get good. Dean Smith in Carolina was really good. Digger Phelps Notre Dame was really good. And then, of course, locally there's Syracuse. So I just loved Syracuse top to bottom, from basically Louis and Bowie on all the way through, GMAC, Mello, all those years. And obviously Syracuse sports has gone on a horrific downturn, which we can get to. But you end up going to Syracuse, which arguably is I think without question, the broadcast university, maybe in the world, right? In terms of
I think for broadcasting, Northwestern, Missouri are great communication schools, a little more maybe on the print side, but I think for broadcasting, I think you're absolutely right. And I kicked around a couple other schools, Boston University, and I have a cousin in my family he's in the movie business now, and he's very successful, but he was an Indiana grad, and he was pushing me to go to, how about the irony of that? I almost went to Indiana. Instead, I go to Syracuse, and I'm on the wrong end of that 1987 game. But I knew Syracuse had a great broadcasting school, and I knew that I loved the campus, just kind of fell in love with the intimacy of the campus. And you're like, man, if I can get in here, and I think I did early admission and got accepted, and I'm like, it is a no-brainer. This is where I have to go. If I want to do this, this is where I have to go. And I think a lot of people that are like me, even to this day, think that same way. If I want to, like you said, it's the place to go where you're going to prepare yourself the best to have a career in sports broadcasting.
Yeah, they churn broadcasters out, in a Hall of Fame broadcasters all over the place have come out of Syracuse. So you go there, and then I'll get to, I'm sure 44s was in your resume back then, and Varsity Pizza.
No, it didn't
and all
exist.
Of that. Oh, it didn't exist back then?
It was called the generic bar. It didn't have a name. It was literally the place that you could go with you could take, I'm trying to rip this up. You could take a receipt and show it to them as your proof of age, and they would let you in. Yeah. The drunkest I have ever been in my life came on one of my birthdays at the generic bar. So 44s did not exist. It was only very early, this is the early 80s. I started Syracuse in 83. So the legend of 44 had not quite, they hadn't changed the zip code yet. They hadn't changed the phone number yet. But so, it was a place called the Generic Bar. Marshall Street was awesome back then, and there was a lot of cool places, and I had a ball there. I had a great time at Syracuse, and aside from the broadcasting part, just some of my lifelong friends and experiences were awesome there, and then you kind of get involved in the broadcasting world there, and one of the first things I do is go for the orientation to the student radio station, which is WAER FM 88, which is where all those guys that you talked about have worked. And it was like, that was the place to go, and the sign up. And, the first thing they tell you is, okay, you got to be here at 5 a.m. because you're going to write sportscasts for the seniors. And that's how you got started back then.
Wow, that's awesome. And so, okay, you do that. Eventually you get to calling. Did you call both football and basketball?
Well, so a little bit of the process is that once you sort of get in the mix there on the staff at WAER, the goal is to call football, basketball, and lacrosse. Those were the games that we did. In order to do that, you had to literally do practice tapes in the stands into a cassette recorder, and submit them to a upperclassman, and he would write you a review and say, hey, you're doing this good, you got to do this better, get a little more specific, get better on the yard lines. And then you'd take that, you'd go do another one, and you'd submit it. And after a bunch of them, they'd go, okay, you're good, you're ready, you're going to be in the rotation now. So that and usually, and for me, it didn't happen until my junior year. So, and literally leading up to that, you're writing for sportscasts, you're going and covering field hockey and soccer and all those other sports, just to kind of learn the process. But eventually you get cleared. And then as a junior, I start to do some football games, and then roll that into basketball. And we would you'd rotate the jobs. And anybody that's in the broadcasting business kind of understands, like you might do play-by. Well, when you get a game, you'd split the game. So a football game would be first and fourth quarter, second and third quarter, and then you'd flip and do color the other 2 quarters. But then the next week you might go back to the studio and run the board, and then the following week you do the halftime show, and then the week after that you might do stats in the booth, because then maybe you had the game the following week. So everybody got a chance to do a little bit of everything, which was great because you learned all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And you learned from everybody else around you, and it made you better. So I think I did maybe 3 football games my junior year, and then by the time I get to my senior year, I'm the assistant sports director. So I did 3 or 4 more. And then because I'm a senior in 1987, it's myself and a guy named Bill Roth, who for many, many years, he's on ESPN, does college football on ESPN now, but he was the longtime voice of Virginia Tech. So we're the 2 seniors. He's the sports director, I'm the assistant sports director. So we know going into the tournament that year that because we're the seniors, that if Syracuse gets to the Final Four, which was a big if at the time, you guys are going to New Orleans. So I did like the first round game, some blowout against some 14th or 15th seed. And then I don't get another game unless they get to the Final Four. Well, they do. So we both go to New Orleans, and literally the setup for the Final Four was you flip a coin. And if you win the coin flip, you get to decide whether you want to do the first half, which halves you want to do. So I'm all in, chips in the middle of the table. And again, we don't know they're going to the championship game, but I'm like, okay, I'm here. I'm in New Orleans. I want the second half of the championship game. So I do the first half of the semifinal game. Bill does the second half, and then we flip it for the championship game. So that's how I get the call of Keith Smart beating the Orange in the championship game in 1987, which is an incredible, still one of the thrills of my lifetime to be able to have done that game in that setting. And there I am, 2 rows behind Bobby Knight at the Superdome. It was an amazing experience for a college kid.
I was going to say, and you watched a lot of incredible basketball, and even when you did football, some really good football players.
Well, it's funny.
Too.
This has come back into my mind because in a couple of weeks, UB's going to play at Nebraska. It'll be the first time I've ever gone to Nebraska, but it brings back memories of the 1984 upset of #1 Nebraska at Syracuse. And I was doing one of those practice games into a cassette recorder in the stands. And then I think the guy that I was doing with, we was sort of, by the end of the third quarter, we sort of realized what was going on. And we're like, the heck with it. We stopped the and just cheered.
Right.
Because that upset of #1 Nebraska is one of the all-time great wins in Syracuse football history. So those memories have come back a little bit, knowing I'm going back to Nebraska. But there were some great moments. Dick McPherson was the head coach. He really got that program going in the right direction. There were some great wins over Doug Flutie in football, and then in basketball, like you said, with Boeheim and that great team with Ronnie Cycli and Pearl Washington before that. And it was the ultimate era of Big East basketball. And it was every game, every night was just a war. And if you weren't doing the game on radio, you were in the stands going nuts, yelling at Patrick Ewing and John Thompson, because the hatred was so severe back then. So the timing was wonderful. Like you said, the athletic ramp up at Syracuse was incredible. They won a lacrosse national championship in my time there. So like everything just fell into place.
Yeah, for sure. The lacrosse team was the standard, or the gold standard back then with the Gate brothers.
The Gates, I think, were like the last year or 2 that I was there. So they weren't like stars at the time, but like they would come into the game and you'd go, what did that guy just do? Like
Right.
And you knew they were going to be great.
Right. Well, full disclosure, in Bull's basement, I have hanging a signed Derek Coleman jersey. So that gives me kind of an idea of.
I don't have it behind me, but I have this is a little bit later. I have a signed Carmelo Anthony that I bought at an auction, but I got to hang that up somewhere. I don't have that behind me, but I got to get that on the wall.
So were you friendly with any of the players? I mean, did you do like pre-game interviews with the players or?
Sure. Yeah, we did all that stuff. I don't know that I would say friendly, but you saw them on campus and you got to know them a little bit.
Yeah.
And,
and they were bigger than life, right?
Oh, absolutely. Pearl Washington, who was only there the first 2 years that I was there. He came in the same year that I did, and he wound up going to the NBA. You'd see him on campus, and he was a mega star. Like there was such a big buildup for when he got there. This incredible wizard from New York City, and then when he gets there, he's amazing as a freshman. The half court shot to beat Boston College, and I was in the stands there. Like it was one of the greatest moments ever. So Pearl like ruled that place.
Yeah.
And then all the basketball players and to some degree the football players, they were all like, you'd see them out on Marshall Street and like people would just go nuts.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Yeah, I've been to my share of games there, and I've seen some of the better players play, and it's just an incredible scene, or at least was back in the day. I think it's probably lost some of that luster, unfortunately. Now, I mean, as has everything. I mean, once conference realignment. I mean, when the Big East broke up, that literally, and I'm sure for you even more, was one of the saddest days ever.
No question. No question, because of all those memories that we talked about, and you remember and you think about it, Bull, when I'm there in the mid 80s, I think the Big East had 3 teams in the Final Four the one year.
That's right.
You got Georgetown, you got Louis Carnesecca, St. John's, you got Nova, which wins a championship in 1985, and UConn was good, and
Pitt.
Like Pitt and Boston College was like all those Big East tournaments. I had a chance to call games in the Garden at 2 Big East tournaments my junior and senior year. Like those were battles. Though there was never a game off. Seton Hall started to get good.
That's right.
Back then. Like those games were wars, and then Syracuse I think lost in '86 to Walter Berry, Chris Mullen, and St. John's in the Big East final, and then I don't remember if they won or even lost in '87 the next year. But like I said, every one of those games in the Carrier Dome, 30,000 people are just bonkers about whomever they're playing. There was no nights off. There was no easy games. The intensity was just incredible. And, Rick Pitino in Providence, where they, we didn't mention then Billy Donovan was there at the time, so it's not like that anymore. Unfortunately, that heyday, that's why they write books and do 30 for 30s on the heyday of the Big East in the mid 80s, because it was never better in my opinion than it was back then.
Yeah.
And like I said, even the football was good because it was Boston College, it was Rutgers, it was Penn State. Syracuse always played Penn State, always got their ass kicked by Penn State until 1987. Remember the first play of the game, the Rob Moore 80-yard touchdown pass from Don McPherson? Like that moment was the first ever moment where we could stand toe to toe with Penn State, which we had never been able to do before. So even the football games, because it was so intense and regional, and yes, and I understand it as well as anybody why it's turned into what it is now, but you just can't tell me that anybody gets excited about a Wake Forest Syracuse football or basketball game at any point anymore.
Not at all. It's sad. It really is. I mean, the one and dones have hurt the sport. And obviously conference realignment has really hurt it as well. Okay, let's fast forward. So awesome Syracuse memories. Thank you. One last thing before we get to your professional career. Let's talk about your roommate very quickly, because it's pretty famous. People in Buffalo know about this, but people outside of Buffalo may not. Your roommate was a guy who has kind of turned into sort of the modern day Bob
He's
Costas.
kind of a big deal.
Yeah, a little bit.
Mike Tirico. Yeah, Mike Tirico. And to this day, Mike and I are dear friends. He's the godfather of one of my daughters. And we met, he was a year after me. So I was a sophomore, and I think we kind of met at the radio station, and right away you could just tell there was an it factor with Mike, that there was he might have been a freshman, but there was a charisma and a talent and a skill, and people gravitated to him. One of my other roommates is Todd Callis, whose dad was the very famous Harry Callis, and Todd's the equally as famous TV broadcaster for the Houston Astros now. Todd pinned the nickname the mayor on Mike, because we could not walk to a class together without him knowing and or shaking the hands of at least 25 or 30 people. Like you'd have to leave 10 minutes early for class because you had to build in Mike Mayer time. But that was Mike's personality. Aside from that, he was just incredibly talented, and there was no ego. He wanted to make you better. You helped make him better. And it was wonderful being a part of something, of doing games with him and being around him. And we've been friends to this day, and he's a wonderful guy, and none of his success surprises me at all. He is good at anything and everything. And that's, and again, that's what, when I grew up in that era of the 70s, when it was Dick Enberg and Kurt Gowdy, and then Bob Costas comes onto the scene, and Vin Scully, those guys did everything and they were great at everything. Jim McKay, he would do Acapulco cliff diving on Wide World of Sports,
Yeah.
those guys did everything. And I have always, and you talked about me having a great resume, and I appreciate you saying that, but there's a lot of inspiration to me from that. Like, if you're a real sports broadcaster, you got to be able to do anything, even if you're like, oh, I don't really know much about that, but that's kind of the drive and the challenge. And there's nobody better at that than Mike, and I remember when Mike did the World Cup for ESPN years ago. And I'm like, Mike, what do you know about soccer? He goes, nothing. He goes, but give me 3 weeks and a bunch of research and I'll be good to go. And damn, wasn't he? Like, you would have never known that he didn't grow up watching English Premier League soccer. And same thing with the Olympics. That's what makes him so great, is that, hey, Mike, I need 2 days from now, I need you to do a cricket match. Bang, he'd be ready. Even if he'd never seen it before in his life.
Well, that's one thing I will take away from you, because you were always incredibly prepared. And listen, in 2021, Mike Tirico probably has 20 researchers working for him, but I would assume, based on what you've said, that he probably does plenty of it on his own. Yeah,
no question. He may take all that information that helps him, but ultimately he's going through all of it and he's parsing through it and figuring out what he needs to. And I think I learned that. I think I learned a little bit of that from him. Maybe Mike learned a little bit of that from me, but there was a whole collection of all of us. And I think, when you're in a competitive environment like that, it wasn't like, I got to be better than that guy. It's like, I got to be as good as that guy. If I'm going to do a game with him, I need to spend extra time and prepare more and be ready. And I appreciate you saying that, but I've always sort of prided myself on being prepared. And sometimes, I've used this example. It's like you go into a game with 100 notes, and you might use 5 of them. The problem is you don't know which 5 you're going to need, and I've
100%.
always felt like if I'm underprepared, I don't feel comfortable. So I always want to be over prepared, and I don't mind doing it. And literally this is where the spot behind me, I'm going to spend a lot of time in that chair in front of that computer for the next 3 months. Because I over prepare for all the UB games. Do I need to? I don't know. Maybe. I just don't know any other way.
Yeah, no. And that's the right way to do it. Okay. So I'm going to hang on to Rico for one more second.
Sure.
I mean, listen, everyone speaks so highly of him, but come on, give me some dirt. Give me, was he messy as a roommate? Did he leave the towel on the floor where there? I'm assuming the guy can't grow any facial hair. It just doesn't look like he might. I would ask if there were whiskers in the sink or something.
God, I don't remember. Callis was the messy one. Callis, okay. He'll be mad at me when I say it. Callis was the messy one. Mike's like on point with everything. With almost everything in his life. So I know, don't you hate that? But it was great. We were all obsessed. It was the 3 of us, and then we later had a 4th roommate whose name is Charlie Palillo, and Charlie's been a sports talk show host in Houston for about 25 years. And Charlie was always the smartest one of all of us. So, but we just obsessed over everything. I can't tell you how many nights we sat in our dorm, because we spent a couple of summers in Syracuse. I spent my junior and senior years, my summers in Syracuse, didn't go home because we were working at the radio station. I was working at the TV station. So I can't tell you how many summer nights we sat in our room watching Braves games on TBS, because this would have been 1985, 86, when all the games weren't on, just obsessing over every statistic and player. And that's all we did. And just amongst all of us, and then it'd always be 3 or 4 other guys that would come over and hang out, or we'd go to the Syracuse Chiefs games and go watch the Chiefs games and sit on the roof at Old MacArthur Stadium and watch Fred McGriff and Cecil Fielder and Tony Fernandez with the Chiefs at the time. How about that?
Wow.
But it was all sitting around talking about sports, remembering sports, analyzing it. And I think we all helped make each other better just because we were so singularly focused.
I'll tell you what, I need a rewind. Please take me back like 30 years ago.
It was
'Cause
so much fun.
man, it
It was
was
so
fun.
much fun, Rich. It really
Yep,
was.
100%. Let's fast forward now to your pro career, and you go to Buffalo WIVB Channel 4. You were there for years, and you did an incredible job. So I'm going to break down and ask you a couple of stories about that. What was the best event you ever covered while working there?
Well, I mean, obviously, I got a chance to cover all 4 Super Bowls. I get there in 1988, and the playoff run starts 2 years later, which was incredible. So I mean, Stanley Cup Finals, whatever. But I'll slightly spin the question to you this way. People ask me all the time, like, what's the coolest moment or the coolest singular sporting event you've been to? And most people would think it'd be the Stanley Cup Finals or the Super Bowl. And I always tell people the most singular event in sports that I've ever been at that still to this day gives me chills was covering the Daytona 500. 1996, 97, that start of the Daytona 500, 43 cars coming around the turn, 250,000 people cheering on their feet, the noise, the smell, the emotion, the green flag dropping. That singular event is one of the single coolest things I have ever experienced in my entire career of sports. Kickoffs to Super Bowls were similar, but there was just something about that the sort of visceral effect of that start of the Daytona 500 that I will never, ever forget.
I'm curious why you would have been covering the Daytona 500.
Well, Chuck Howard, who was on the staff at Channel 4, was a big racing fan, and he sort of convinced. He was a Southern Tier guy. He was from Cattaraugus County. Like he got that Western New York was a big racing town. The race was on CBS. That helped a little bit too. But Chuck started that. Chuck started really ramping up the racing coverage. He covered a couple of Daytona 500s, and then he left to go to Charlotte, and it kind of left me to pick up the slack. I had always been a little bit of a racing fan, always watched the Indy 500 every year with my dad, always kind of liked stock car racing a little bit. So I was eager to volunteer for it. So we always did it because we were able to sell a sponsorship, and we knew people. The race was on Channel 4, all those things that figured into the economics of why you would go down there to do it. So that's how I wind up down there. Did a bunch of them at Watkins Glen as well too.
That is very interesting. I would never have guessed that would have been your answer to that question. Who was your favorite player to cover when you were in Buffalo?
You know what, Phil Hansen and Kent Hull in particular, and those guys pretty well. They were just great guys. They were just they're Kent Hull was always like, if you really wanted to learn something and you really wanted to get the real story, because you didn't always get it from Jim and Thurman and Andre and Bruce and those guys. They were too big of stars. Kent would always tell you the real story, and he didn't look down his nose at you, and he didn't treat you as a second-class citizen. And Phil Hansen was very much the same way on defense. Phil was just a salt of the earth guy. He always was. He came from a small town, never got the big ego. Just was always a guy that you could go talk to. And hey, and maybe it wasn't always on camera, but you could always go ask a question and find out, hey, why is this working? Why is this not working? So those are two of my all-time favorite guys, covering the Bills all those years, because they were just great. They were just awesome. There are a lot of really good guys, but those two in particular, because they were also really, really good players.
Yeah. Then I was going to ask you, who was the biggest pain in the ass for you? You may choose not to answer that question. That's fine.
It was Bruce Smith. Let's be honest. I'm not trying to insult the guy or not, but he was a pain in the ass. He really was. He was a big star. He knew it. I don't think he ever really had a lot of patience or time for the local media. At that point, he had, the national media was a little more in his wheelhouse. And, and Bruce he used to make us wait. He just everything he could kind of do to be a pain in the ass, and whatever. I've talked to him plenty of times since then, and he's older now. But at the time, he was a big, mega giant star, and there were enough things in his past that were a little bit negative, so there was some animosity built up, but it was an effort covering Bruce Smith back then.
Best story, because here's the other thing that you did. So you mentioned covering the Bills for TV, but you also were on Bills radio for a very long time. And like I said, I was kind of your understudy, and it was fun to learn from you. But share one or a couple stories from the road, whether it was on TV with the Bills or traveling on the charter doing radio with the Bills.
Yeah, I mean, just those road trips are always fun. Whether it's everybody getting together and doing something the night before. I mean, again, I traveled for 15 years, which means I got a chance to go almost everywhere. And you get a chance to see the country. You get a chance to go to Chicago and to Denver and to Seattle and all these places that you might not normally go to. So that was always a great experience, and you'd always made it a point to like, okay, we're in Seattle. What do we need to do? Right. You need to go to the Pike Place Fish Market and a lot of these are van stories because there's always some connection to Crazy Van in all these. So, so a lot of these are what can we do with Van or what can we get Van to do? So like, for instance, Seattle, it was a night game. So we had a whole day to fill and we had to do like a taped story for the 6 o'clock. So we were like, okay, so let's go over to the Pike Place Fish Market and get them to toss the fish over our head. So there you get Van and they're tossing the fish and he's making fish jokes and he's being typically goofy Van like he is. So it was always kind of fun stuff like that you got a chance to do, you got to go eat, like people come here to eat wings. You got to go and eat deep dish in Chicago and you got to have barbecue in Kansas City. Like those are always the fun parts about, the traveling can beat you down after a while. And for most of that, I was not on the charter. I was on the charter on occasion. But you go to New Orleans, you're going to go out on Bourbon Street, and you're going to go sit in a club and listen to music. And those were great experiences. The road could also wear you out. And there's plenty of time sitting there trying to put a story together in a loading dock somewhere and sprinting across the stadium to get to a live truck back in those days, to get the tape so you could feed it in time to get it back. And and just all of those kind of challenges and stuff, it was hard, but it was fun. And I did a lot of my traveling with our sports photographer at the time, Jeff Helmick, and Jeff, and he's a great guy. And we were a good team. We worked well together. He'd have my back, hey, I want to do this story. Hey, do you got a shot of that? For this story? Oh yeah, I got that. Like I didn't even have to tell him. I got that. Yeah. So it was a great experience. And then just being around Van was just amazing. I mean, that first Super Bowl in Tampa. Now keep in mind, after the 51-3 game over the Raiders, there was no extra week off. So literally they beat Oakland 51-3, and I'm on a plane at 7 a.m. Monday morning to go to Tampa. So like you didn't have time to think. Like we had to do all the planning like before, like if they win, here's what's going to happen. So you get thrown into a Super Bowl, which to me has always been the biggest like event to have to cover. It's just there's so much to it. But that was Van's first Super Bowl. He had done the games for 30 years and it was his first Super Bowl. He was bouncing off the walls. He was so happy to be there. He was so excited. Like we had to like rein him in a little bit, which is not easy to do. So just being around Van for those Super Bowls was amazing. And he just, like goofy stories, like I think we were in maybe in Pasadena for the third one. And, we have this brilliant idea. We were doing like a 15-minute show and instead of Letterman, like at 11:30 every night. So we always wanted to end it with something funny. So I get this brilliant idea because at the time everybody used to rag on Jimmy Johnson's perfect hair, right? So every day I'd have Jeff or one of the sports photographers get a real close up of Jimmy's hair, and it would be the Jimmy Johnson hair update, like to see whether any of the hairs had moved. Like every night that was a recurring gag. So I'd always like nudge Van into, so we're in an interview with Jimmy Johnson, like up in the stands. It wasn't a press conference. It was like a huddle around there. And I'm like, Van, ask Jimmy about his hair so we can use it in the show tonight. And this is classic Van. Van's like, hey, Jimmy, there's some knucklehead sportscaster in Buffalo that's making fun of your hair every night. Like, what do you think of that? And like Jimmy Johnson gives this real, like serious, well, I want my appearance to be good. And I want to like this real serious answer. And I'm dying behind it, trying not to like fall off the bleachers laughing because that knucklehead sportscaster was Van that was doing it. Like, just stuff like that was so much fun. And but let me say this to you, Bull, and you got to know Van pretty well. I learned so much from him. He was a goofball, but he was so good and so smart, and we all learned so much from being around him. And you know, being able to sit there and talk to Van about play-by-play was like a master's thesis class. You know, I mean, and he was always open with his guidance, and he'd listen to the games. Hey, you want to do this a little better? You're doing a good job on this. Like, what could be better than that? And those are the things that I think about for all those years of being on the road. It almost always went back to some crazy ass Van story when he tried to talk us into the press parking in Washington, and by dropping Daniel Snyder's name, and then finally got caught. You know, like, just stuff like that I'll always remember.
And by the way, for people that don't know, again, there are people that aren't, you know, in Buffalo looking at this or listening to this. You know, Van for the longest time was a TV guy. He was the sports anchor at Channel 4 for the longest time, in addition to doing Braves basketball and Bills football, which most people remember from radio. So he was your mentor in two places, not only on the television side, but also on the radio side.
I was the first producer he had ever had. I got hired in 1988, not on the air at Channel 4, but as Van's producer. And even though my aspirations were to be on the air, it was a good job in a good market. I was working part-time back at home in New Jersey, living at my parents' house. I'm like, I need to get my life going here. So even though it was a little bit of a step back for what I wanted to do, it was a good opportunity. So, but remember, I had not grown up in Western New York, so I didn't really know Van. I knew who he was. I knew how well respected he was, but I didn't like have memories from like a 5-year-old of Van. So for me, it was like learning all this stuff from Van, like at that level, was like, what is up with this guy? You know, but you very soon realized that he was a legend. And you know, so I did that, and Van was a big part of helping me make that transition to being on the air, whether it was on the Bills radio network or eventually at Channel 4. So my career would not be what it is without his influence, and to this day I think about him a lot, particularly when you get ready for a football season and you walk into a booth. I always think a lot about Van.
Yeah, my favorite thing about Van was every time I would see him when it wasn't necessarily official, maybe he'd come to the radio studio to do something with us. He would sit in the studio with me, and he would always do, and I know he did this with everybody, so this is not totally unique, but he would say, "Oh, Gensler's got the ball at the 30, and he's down to the 20, the 10, the 5, he's down to the, oh, he fumbles the ball, and the Bills lose." But,
everybody. He did it for everybody.
Yeah. Van was an absolute treasure. We miss him, obviously, still today. With Paul Peck. So you're doing some bowling.
There's another Van influence.
No offense, but you are no Chris Schenkel.
I am not. So again, I'm not really a bowler. So I'll be the first to admit it. So when my old boss, Chris Musial, who was my boss at Channel 4 for many years, and he now runs WBBZ, when they brought Beat the Champ back, he reached out to me and said, "I want you to host it." I'm like, "Chris, I don't know anything about bowling." I'm like, it's not my sport. I don't really know it. I don't think I'm the right guy for this. So I kind of stiff-armed him for a month or two, and he kept calling me, kept bugging me. And finally, again, I thought of Van, because when I got to town in 1988, Van was still hosting Beat the Champ, and it died out like a year or two later, and then it went away. But really, the only two guys that ever hosted that show were Chuck Healy in the 60s and 70s, and then Van in the 70s and 80s. So finally, there was twofold. It was like, Van would be proud of me if I kept his legacy going. And going back to what we talked about before, if I want to consider myself a true broadcaster, then I got to be able to figure out how to call a sport that I might not know or be comfortable with. So I kind of took it as a little bit of a challenge. So I said, okay, fine. So my first call was to my buddy Greg Merkel, who's the head of the Greater Buffalo USBC bowling, and he's a bowling guy. Like, Greg, what do I need to know? You know, tell me what I need to know. And then the opportunity to work with a Hall of Fame bowler like Sue Novoisky, who's amazing, made me very easily figure out that I don't need to know about oil patterns. I just need to know to ask Sue about oil patterns.
Right.
So all that said, I jump into this, and I'm sure there's some people in the bowling community that you know, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about or whatever. And but I think I've gotten to the point where I can either hide it pretty well, or I know just enough to be dangerous. And I honestly, we haven't done the show because of COVID in over a year. I miss it, Rich. It's like the quintessential Buffalo local thing.
Yep.
People grew up watching it with their dads, with their uncles, like, and they'll watch it. They may not have picked up a bowling ball in 30 years. They don't know who any of those guys are, but it's Beat the Champ, and they'll watch it for 15 minutes and see how these guys do. And these guys have become sort of local B-level sports celebrities because they're great at bowling. And it's been really fun for me to just kind of tell their stories a little bit.
I don't know if is this a Western New York thing? Like in Rochester growing up, we had a thing similar called Bowling for Dollars. It had to be the same thing. It was this guy, Ron DeFrance, who was a sports guy at the ABC affiliate, was the host. So I don't know. Is this just like did you have this in Jersey? Is this just a Western New York thing? Like we know
That's
kegling.
a good question.
Kegling
I don't remember
here,
it. And there was Bowling for Dollars I think was in the 70s was everywhere.
Okay.
Right. I think that was maybe even a national or syndicated thing. And then, like you said, Chris Schenkel on Wide World of Sports with Earl Anthony and all those guys, that was on all the time.
Yeah.
I know Beat the Champ is the longest running local bowling show anywhere in the country. I don't know how many other local shows there are. I don't even know if there are any others. It's bowling is a quintessential Buffalo sport. I know it's big in the Midwest. It's big in Chicago. It's big in Indianapolis, places like that. But it is a quintessential Buffalo. And I think you can trace the roots back to, and I've talked to enough people over the years to sort of learn it. When this was a heavily blue collar town in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, Bethlehem Steel, Republic Steel, all like half this town worked in the factories. And when you got off your shift at 5 o'clock, you went to the bowling alley, you had wings, a shot and a beer, and you bowled in your league. And there probably were 3 times as many bowling centers as there are now. And there's a lot now too. So it was ingrained in the culture of Western New York. And I think to this day it still is. And there's a reason why there's always 3 or 4 Western New York guys on the PBA tour, because it's the competition level and it's the history and it's people learning from great bowlers and passing it on. And the leagues are very competitive in this town because guys from Buffalo go all over the country and win a lot of money. So it highlights those guys, and they deserve to be highlighted.
I know people are going to wonder what my high game was a 281. Not bad.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, not bad.
That's awesome.
Did you
get you on the show?
No. That was a long time ago. And that was one of that was like me getting a hole in one, right? I mean, pure luck. So have you ever called the 300 game?
Yeah, we've had 4 or 5 of them on the show.
That's got to be exciting.
It is one of the great singular moments in sports, right? You can't look away when somebody's taking a perfect game into the 10th frame, right? There's just an anticipation and excitement level. You're hanging on every shot, got to make those 3 strikes in the 10th frame to make it happen. Like it's like a no-hitter, right? It happens maybe even a little more than a no-hitter, but not all that much more. It's just a super cool moment. Like you can't look away. If someone's on the brink, if you're flipping around the TV and you see that a guy's going to the 10th frame perfect, like you don't turn that off.
Yeah. Even when you're in a bowling center, I remember vividly a couple of years ago being at a bowling center and word gets out that so-and-so's got 9 strikes in a row, whatever. So you go to lane 23 and now like there's this crowd starting to build and gather. And sure enough, you watch him and this random guy strikes out in the 10th and the whole place is like, woo!
It's super cool. It is really cool, and it amazes me. We've had a couple guys on the show, some of the better bowlers on Beat the Champ, a guy like by the name of Mike Zarcone and Chuck Jagodzinski. They've had like 100 of them in their career. Oh, it's amazing to me. Right. It's crazy.
All right. Now fast forward, football, college football, UB. This is what you do. This is your thing. Play-by-play voice of the UB Bulls. It's really incredible what you've seen since you've been doing this in terms of the football and basketball programs, right? I mean, football, you go back, we can go back to Turner Gill, but all the way through Lance Leipold. I mean, what a buildup that this program, it literally went from virtually nothing to competitive and the team people are chasing arguably every single year. Basketball, you go from Hurley to Oates to Whitesell. Nobody's missed a beat. I mean, tournament, they go deep into the tournament. In basketball, it's remarkable What's happened
Well,
there on North Campus with UB?
so take it back a little step further. I did my first football game at UB, filling in for, I think I filled in for Murph or Pete Weber at the time, 1991. It was a game at Ithaca when UB was still a
Wow.
Division III program transitioning up to division at the time 1AA.
Right.
And then I take over full time there. So, you know, and in their Division 1AA they have a really good season in 1996. Craig Service is the head coach. Drew Haddad was the star player. They almost make the Division 1AA playoffs, and then the Mid-American Conference calls and brings them in after that. And then that was a major step back, because to go from Division 3 in 91 to Division 1A in 1999 is incredible. And they weren't built for it. They didn't know how to do it yet. So there was a lot of times in the 90s, early 2000s where you're like, are they ever going to figure this out? You know, are they ever going to be anything other than a perennial doormat? And then you get that spurt of 2008 and Turner Gill when they win the MAC championship, with James Starks and Naaman Roosevelt and Drew Willie and those guys. And that was the moment where you're like, yeah, it can happen here. But then even after that, it was fits and starts. It was a couple of bad seasons, and then Khalil Mack comes, and then it's a bowl in 2013. But now you're to the point now where it is, they're a perennial winner. And I don't know that I would have told you that was ever going to happen. And I talk about this with a few of the people around UB that have been around that long. And you're like, man, we always wondered whether we always knew it had the potential based on the size and the resources and the kind of school UB is, but you never know whether they're going to figure it out right. And now you're to the point where you just, you know, for me, you walk into a stadium, you expect them to win. How much are they going to win by? You know, and trust me, I've done a lot of games where it was how much are they going to lose by today? You know, I mean, there were some games back in the 2000s when they were playing Northern Illinois and some of those really good MAC schools where it would be 48-0 at the half, you know, and you're like, how do you make this work? You know, I mean, that's not fun as a broadcaster, right? So, you know, and then like you said, even on the basketball side, and to be able to do it by changing coaches, which is always the hard part at UB. And I know people get upset about it. And why are they, has anybody yet shown any loyalty? It's the nature of who they are and what they are in the scheme of college athletics, that you want coaches that are hard chargers and are always going to try to grab for a better opportunity, and the money, let's face it, is part of it too. So to have Hurley do what he did, Hurley leaves, Nate Oates does it even better. Jim Weitzel is maintaining it. I'm convinced, and we'll find out, that Maurice Linguist will be able to continue what Lance Leipold has built. It's awesome. It's amazing, you know, and strictly from a selfish standpoint, I get to go to bowl games, and I get to, you know, they give me stuff like this, you know, and I've got a few of these now. Like it's awesome. It's amazing to be a part of a successful program. You know, and go a step further, Rich. You know, I had a chance to see every game Khalil Mack ever played here, even when people didn't know who the hell he was. I've called a 7 overtime game. I've called an 8 touchdown, 407-yard rushing game by Jarrett Patterson. I mean, I've had some incredible opportunities. I guess when you do it long enough, like I have, you're going to see a little bit of everything. But, you know, we joked about this. They changed the rules this year. There's never going to be another 7 overtime game. They changed the rules to prevent games from going that long. So I was at a UB fan event last week, and one of the things we said in front of the crowd, I said, pat yourself on the back. If you were at that game, you can say that you were there, because you're never going to see it again. It's never going to happen again. So like, that's kind of cool to be able to say, hey, there's 3 guys in college football history that run for 8 touchdowns in a game, and I got a chance to call one of them. So I'm incredibly fortunate. My association with UB has been amazing, and it's been really cool to be a little part of that incredible ride that they've had.
All right, so let's talk about Mo Linguist, because I was aware that he was with UB back for a couple of years in 12, 13.
Under Jeff Quinn. He was the DB's coach under Jeff Quinn.
So then he moves from there, and he's with some Power 5 teams for a bunch of years. And then he goes to the Dallas Cowboys and is their DB coach. And I read that and I hear that, and I'm like, wait a minute. You're in the NFL. You're a DB's coach for America's team, and you leave to come to Buffalo to be the head coach?
Well, he left to go to Michigan.
Okay.
And I don't know whether they changed some staff in Dallas or whatever that was, but Mo had just been hired as the co-defensive coordinator for the Wolverines.
Got it.
And then literally within a month gets the UB job because of the crazy timing of Coach Leipold leaving. But, and it's been really interesting to talk to Mo. He's been at Minnesota under PJ Fleck in the Big Ten. He's been at two different SEC schools, Mississippi State under Dan Mullen, Texas A&M under Jimbo Fisher. He's been at Iowa State. He's been with the Cowboys. Like, he's been around some really, really high level people. And it's been very interesting. I've had a chance to go to a couple practices for UB this year, and they spend more time on situations, end of game situations, than I've ever seen at a college football practice. And I asked Mo one day, I said, does that come from your time in the NFL? And he said, absolutely. He said, NFL, 70% of the games are decided in the last 5 minutes. He goes, you spend half the practice in the NFL on situational things like that. So he said, I'm going to totally bring more of that here to make sure our guys are prepared for whatever scenarios come into play. So he's really bringing an interesting depth of coaching to Buffalo, and you can see it in the people that are around him and the way the players have bought into him. I mean, there's a respect level that, which to me was the biggest challenge. I mean, Lance and his staff were awesome, and they won 30 games the last 4 years. Like, they did a lot of things right. So you could understand how the players would be a little bit hesitant to go, we used to do it that way and it worked great, but now we're going to do it this way. But Mo's resume and his personality have, I think, alleviated any of those fears of any concern about, is this the right way to do it?
So, okay, I'm backing up to, so my original question was based on his resume. With the resurgence of UB sports and football in particular, is that why it made this job so attractive to I mean, he's going from the NFL to one of the all-time great powerhouses in college football in Michigan, and then he says, I'm going to go back to Buffalo. So what does
Head coach.
say? Yeah,
got a chance to be a head coach.
Okay,
in his late 30s, he's got a chance to be a head coach at a place that he has some level of familiarity with, having been here. And to your point, there's only two reasons why you have to replace a coach: you were bad, or you were good and you took a better job. So he's taking over a team that's won 24 games the last three years, at two MAC East championships, and has won 2 bowl games in a row. So the cupboard is far from bare. So it is built for him to be successful, and I'm sure that was part of his thinking as well too.
Okay, good. So let's talk about the team. You lose Jarrett Patterson, who you mentioned. We lose Malcolm Kuntz. We lose a bunch of really good offensive linemen, some wideouts, some people on defense. So there are question marks, obviously, but you got Van Treese back at quarterback. You got Kevin Marks back at running back. You got Taylor Riggins, I'm assuming, is 100% healthy. Ready
he is 100%. Yep.
So talk about what, your thoughts are in terms of, scouting the 2021 Bulls and what you think they're going to be capable of.
Well, let's start with the two guys you mentioned. You lose a Jarrett Patterson, one of the transcendent players, not only in Buffalo history, but in college football history. And look what he's doing now in Washington. But you're plugging in a guy who averaged 100 yards a game last year. And this, to me, is amazing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Kevin Marks has split time with Jarrett Patterson his entire career. He is 1,428 yards away from the school record. And I would not doubt that he is going to nudge, push, and maybe blow that out this year, because he's the guy this year. He's got a chance to set the school record, Brandon Oliver's school record for rushing, and he has never been the starting running back here. So you're plugging him in, and there should be absolutely no drop off in production at running back. Okay. You lose a Malcolm Kuntz, 4th round pick of the Raiders, who led the MAC in sacks 2 years in a row. And you're plugging in Taylor Riggins, who had 8.5 sacks 2 years ago, was injured, didn't play last year. So there shouldn't be any drop off there. There's going to be a little drop off on the offensive line because you lost 3 starters. One of them went to Kansas. One of them went to Baylor. One of them's in the NFL, right? They've got some younger guys there. They feel pretty good about it. But that's a position that'll have to figure itself out a little bit. Receiver is going to be a little bit younger, but to Coach Linguist's credit, he's brought in some transfers of guys that he's dealt with before. A kid from Texas A&M who's going to start at defensive tackle. A kid from Texas Tech that's going to start at corner. A couple of junior college kids. And the legacy of what Coach Leipold and his staff did, Bull, was their recruiting the last 2 years, because of the success of the program, has been really, really good. So there were a lot of really, really good young players that just didn't play because they were down on the depth chart and there were better players ahead of them. Well, those kids are now ready to step into the lineup. And as we've seen over the years, they've been pretty good about figuring out how to replace a Tyree Jackson and a Anthony Johnson and some of those other guys that were here 3-4 years ago. So, I've told people that the Bulls are going to be good this year. They're going to be a lot better in October than they are in September because it's a new offense, it's a new defense, there's new players in new places. It'll take them that first month to get themselves figured out. But when they start MAC play, I expect them to be one of the top teams in the MAC. And the non-conference schedule sets up that at worst, you should be 2-2, which is what you always want to be, 500 going into the MAC. So my expectations are this is a team that once again will compete to win a MAC championship.
Let me ask you a question that I've always dealt with and had a problem with, unfortunately, in that, and I'm sure you've thought about it because you see it at all home games, but attendance has never been great for UB football games, despite the fact they've been as good as they've been.
Mm-hmm.
What do you attribute that to? I mean, the tickets are cheap, bring your kids out, whatever. It's a Saturday afternoon. Do you attribute that to being in an NFL city where
Yes.
the Bills are? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two things. That has a lot to do with it. We're a pro sports town. We always have been. Our history is the Bills and the Sabres. College athletics is a relatively new part of our sports culture. Remember what I said, UB didn't become a Division I program until 1999. It's 22 years. That's not a lot of time. There's not a lot of kids. We're starting to get some now, but not a lot of kids that sort of grew up with their dad taking them to UB or watching that game. And, I've always sometimes joked that in Buffalo, Saturday is not the day you go watch college football. It's the day you get ready for your tailgate on Sunday, right? It's just who we are as a sports community. And I get frustrated sometimes too. And I do my best to tell people like, hey, there's a kid who's going to be a first round fit. I was telling people going into Khalil Mack's senior year, before the Ohio State game, I said, if you're an NFL draft fan, like go watch this kid. He's going to be a first or a second round pick. Now, at the time before the Ohio State game, we didn't know he was going to be a top 5 pick, but you knew after that. And that was always met with a little bit of ambivalence, which always frustrated me. Like you're an NFL draft fan, you're going to hang on every word that Mel Kiper says for the next 3 months. Why would you not take a 10-minute ride and go watch the kid with your own eyes? Right. And the same goes with a Jarrett Patterson and a Malcolm Kuntz and all those guys they've sent to the NFL. Tyree Jackson was one of the stories of the combine that one year, I don't know. I don't always know, Rich. I'm always a little disappointed sometimes. And I'll give you a great example. The third game of the year this year for UB, Coastal Carolina is coming to town. They were the darlings of college football last year. They are preseason ranked 22. They'll be the first ranked team, assuming they still are, to play in Buffalo since Baylor in 2011 or 12 or something like that. There couldn't be a better game for people who want to experience college football to go to than to go to that game, right? I hope there's 20,000 or 25,000 people there. I don't know that there will be, but to me, that's a great. If you want to sample it, that's the game to sample. And I still, some people still say to me, well, when are they going to play Michigan or Penn State or whatever? And I'm like, they're not going to play them here. It's not going to happen. So if you're holding out for that, I'm sorry. I think you're wrong in that. It's not what college athletics is all about right now at UB's level. So appreciate what they are. They're really good. They've won a lot of games. They're fun to watch. They've sent players to the NFL. I mean, you've been there. You've seen all this. The games are fun. It's easy to get into. The tickets are cheap. The atmosphere is fun. It's not Highmark Stadium. It's not the NFL. It's not trying to be, but it's a great family entertainment. And to me, the pros are the pros, and they're the pros for a reason. But college football is so much more unpredictable. There's so much more of a chance that you'll walk into that stadium and see somebody run for 8 touchdowns, which you're not going to see in the NFL. And that's what I love about it. And I'm trying my best to get people to understand that and see it for what it is. I hope we get there. You've seen progress, but I'm with you. Sometimes you look out there and you go, boy, I wish more people would have thought about coming out today.
Yeah, just give it a chance, you know?
Yep.
The pregame tailgate parties are always great with the live music and the barbecue, and the alumni come back, and it's a terrific brand of football, and they've just been consistently good. And I say it all the time, man, get out there and watch this really great, exciting brand of football on the cheap and enjoy yourself, and then just start spreading the word, and hopefully it'll build. But you're right. I mean, the history doesn't exist, right? Nobody knows anything about Kent State. Nobody knows anything about
Right.
Akron. No, and nobody cares about those teams because they only care about the teams that are in the top 15 typically in college football.
Right.
So,
Which
right.
gets very frustrating to me. And I understand it, I understand it, but I get a little frustrated by that. I know there's a lot of Notre Dame fans in town, and that's great. And there's a great history of their father and their grandfather, and all the Irish Catholics in town rooted for Notre Dame. Like, that's really cool, and it's cool to see. But sometimes you get a little frustrated that people wouldn't think twice. They'd rather sit and watch Notre Dame than they might want to come out and see a game at UB Stadium themselves. And again, there's a lot of faults with the way college athletics is set up, and to me, that's one of them. And certainly with what's gone on in the SEC, you're seeing that it's all about the big brands and the big names, and nobody else seems to matter beyond that. And that rubs me the wrong way. I get it. I'm realistic enough to understand why it happens, but it frustrates you a little bit.
I will be curious to see if Paul Peck is wearing some sort of Kevin Marks gear this year, because he can do it now with the NIL.
He can.
So
he can again, and that's going to be really interesting to see too. And it should have happened a long time ago. In reality, Rich, though that rule was in place more for a UB swimmer who might write songs or write a book or have a hobby or something that she sells on eBay, where in the past she couldn't make any money off it, right? Really, that's what the NIL rules were designed to allow that swimmer at UB to profit on one of her skills, right? But obviously what it's become now is the big names, the football players, the basketball players. Can you get a deal with a car dealer? Can you get a deal with an apparel place? I mean, and again, Kevin Marks is probably the biggest star in the Bulls team. I will see where it goes for him. Can he get a deal with some local companies that understand his value, or do the Bills sort of suck the air out of all of that? Both time and monetarily. So so ultimately at UB's level, it may be more about Kevin Marks being able to write a song and record it and profit off it than it might be for him doing ads for a car dealer.
that's a really interesting perspective that you're right. Most people don't even think about. They just assume, well, this guy's going to have this whole line of merch, and that's what people are going to buy. Well, no, probably not. And you explained it really perfectly about how a lot of these college kids at this level anyway are going to be able to profit from the NIL ruling recently. So, boy, we've gone over a lot, and I've taken way too much of your time, Paul Peck.
No, it's fun. I appreciate the opportunity. I let me say this. I've been incredibly, for all that stuff we've talked about has all been a part of this Western New York community and the sports fan and the sports community. What an honor for me. And I'm sure you'd feel the same way to be a part of to be a little bit of a front row seat of the sports world in this town for a long time, and to have that response. And I always looked at it as a responsibility whether it was a Channel 4 or whether I'm calling a game. It's a responsibility to those fans, whether it's 5, 10, 15,000 or 20,000 of them or more. We have a responsibility to do the job the best that we can, to give them as much information and to educate them as best as we can, to make them even better sports fans. And for me, I'm incredibly fortunate to have had that opportunity and to still have it a little bit. And none of it would happen without, this great community. And I'm thankful for that.
Well, we're thankful for your work over the years here, certainly in Buffalo, and glad that you stayed, unlike a lot of other people that left.
I don't think my wife gave me much choice in the matter.
We look forward to the forthcoming UB season. Obviously, we wish for another great, hopefully a division championship, another trip to the MAC title game and a bowl game and all of that. And certainly Mo Linguist looks like he is a wonderful successor to Lance Leipold with the football program. Basketball program's exciting. A lot going on at UB, and of course in everything you're doing too. So thanks for being part of Bull in the Basement, Paul Peck.
Always a pleasure, man. It's always good to catch up with you. I'm going to have to upgrade the Peck office game to match the very impressive. You've got a better UB helmet than I do. I got to hit the equipment guys up and upgrade a little bit. Mine's a little dated there. I gotta step my game up.
Fair enough. Anything behind you very quickly before we go that you can point out in the back wall that is in particular?
Okay. I don't know. Hopefully you can see that picture. It's not, you might not be able to see it great.
There's some glare, but that's okay.
So my buddy, Paul Vecchio, who worked at UB for many years, and he's the athletic director down at Alfred, 2012, he wins the lottery and gets practice round tickets to the Masters. So we drive down there and we go, and it was amazing and incredible. And because my buddy Tarico is working the event, we connect with him just to say hello, how you doing? And he's like, you guys got a couple of minutes? We're like, yeah, sure. Follow me. So we follow him in. And where do we follow him into? But Butler Cabin.
Come on.
And then we're in there and they're setting up. This is on a Tuesday. They're setting up the TV shots. And the floor manager for ESPN at the time, she's like, can you guys, we want to check the camera shots. Can you guys sit down? So I don't know how well you can see it, but literally that's a picture of the three of us in the Jim Nance and
Masters
Augusta
champion,
chairman and master champion in front of the fireplace in front of the
God
picture. How cool is that?
That is phenomenal,
right? I'm in the Butler Cabin,
right?
You know, like it's awesome. That's why it's got a cool spot. And then the one right above it is an autograph from Joe DiMaggio that I have, because I have a cousin, a distant cousin of mine, who was really good friends with Joe D, because he worked for a guy who was a huge baseball memorabilia collector in New York. So that connection allowed him to get to know Joe DiMaggio. So probably back in the 80s when I was in college, he had Joe D sign, "Good luck in your broadcasting career, Joe DiMaggio." And my wife got the picture, and then the autograph is underneath it. You know, and I'm like, I got an autograph from Joe DiMaggio. Like, how cool is that?
And personalized the way it was. That's pretty remarkable, man.
And then my wife bought me a piece of the dome. That's the Syracuse. They were selling those last year when they tore it down. So she bought me, I got a piece of the dome. Very and then cool. I got a picture with a somewhat drunken Jim Boeheim on Bourbon Street in 1993. That's up in the corner there too.
Nice.
So there's some cool stuff in there. You know, it's like
sure.
it you know, again, when you're around long enough, you stumble into some of this stuff and you're like, I want that on my wall. I want some cool stuff on my wall, just to sort of memorialize the career. So
it looks good, dude. I mean, you're not slouch worthy when it comes to your office here. It looks good. And my wife would argue that I just stuff everything into this bookcase.
No, it looks good. It does not look stuffed. It looks planned out. It looks organized. You know, it's I'm impressed.
Well, maybe I'll have my own reality man cave staging show someday.
Love it.
Right.
Love it.
All right, Paul. Yes. Thank you, man.
Thanks, Bull.